You might not have seen them in coffee as well, so please feel free to prevail yourselves of that supply. Let me, first of all, acknowledge that we're located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence and shape our vibrant community. I'd like to also welcome those who are live streaming with us this morning from Ottawa, Winnipeg, and as far away as Whitehorse. So let's welcome them. All right. Let me run through the agenda of the day so that you have a very clear idea of what we're going to be up to. First of all, those of you who want to know where the workshops are going to be, there's two sources. One, there's SCED, if you go online. And two, just outside this door, at the front of the room, there's a poster that has all of the themes of the workshops and the rooms they're located in. And they're also on the tables, but there's no location on the tables. Is there? Oh, they are. Thank you very much. So that's good. And what we're going to be doing today, of course, is between now 9 o'clock, we're going to be having a great presentation from Nutrien in a few moments, and I'll introduce that. Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, is going to be addressing us. Opportunity for us also to pose questions. They're doing quite unique initiatives at Unilever. We'll have a chance to exchange with Paul and see what they've been up to as well. Then the sessions will begin at 10. There won't be a break this morning, so if you need coffee or whatever, there's really only one room that's not on this floor. That's a little away, but you have access to coffee and so on. And the washrooms, for those of you who haven't found them, are just down the hall. We'll be having lunch at 11:30, and the lunch will be served outside, but you can have it in this room, or you even have access to other rooms that are available over there. That'll go on. There's a break at 2 this afternoon. Of course, there's a breakout session at 12:30. Another one at 2:30, and at 4 o'clock, we aim to gather back here at the end of the day. Now, there's a task I'm going to leave you with, because the end of the day is really going to be about shaping the forward agenda together. And there are going to be 3 conversations in this room as we're back here at the end of the day. The first point I'd like you to note is we're going to be asking you what you felt have been the key, most valuable takeaways from this symposium that have energized you personally. 1, key takeaways. Secondly, are there any commitments or actions that you feel compelled to take, given the nature of the work that you do and the life that you lead, that have been inspired by this symposium and building on your own personal passions for what it is that you want to do that makes a difference to the world? So that's the second point, the key actions or commitments that you're walking out of the symposium with. And thirdly, because we are not alone, who would you be inclined to contact or to be in touch with or to engage as you move forward to do what you feel you need to do as we move forward together in the implementation of SDGs? And this is really a call to action, all these 3 points. Because essentially, the overarching question is, in this room and those with whom you are connecting, you are part of a leadership community that is really, if working together, can actually make a huge difference. And this is what this is all about. So I invite you to reflect on that in the course of the day. Get as much as you can. Be selfish today in terms of those workshops. Get as much out of them as you can. Pose questions. Engage. Challenge the speakers. Challenge the conversations that you're in. Raise the conversation to a higher level. And this is with a view to really coming together at the end of the day and saying, so, where do we go from here together? What are the types of things that we have to do well? What networks are we going to leverage? How are we going to move forward together? And what actions do we feel really comfortable to pursue, individually and collectively? So that's going to be the day. So I hope you Jump in, 2 feet, a lot of energy, everything you've got, and at the end of the day, we'll do a harvest together. So the next step is I have the pleasure of introducing Candice Lang. And we also want to thank Nutrien for their dedication to the SDGs. They've really demonstrated it in so many ways. Their financial support to also make Together 2017 and now 2018 happen. And Candice Lang. Candice, I have the pleasure of introducing you. You are a skilled resource in the development of strategic business initiatives that create high-performance cultures and help organizations achieve business results. Candice is currently the Vice President of Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations at Nutrien, and which happens to be the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services. Please put your hands together to welcome Candice Lang.
All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction, Dan. And in the spirit of this symposium and working together, I wanted to talk just for a few minutes this morning about the role of the private sector and the SDGs. And first, though, I want to answer just a couple of questions that came up for me yesterday as I was meeting a few of you and networking at the breaks. One of those questions was, so how did Nutrien come to be? Was it an acquisition? Was it a merger? So I'll tell you a little bit about that first. Nutrien came together earlier this year from the merger of equals between 2 legacy organizations, Potash Corp and Agrium. And mergers of equals are a lot of fun, and a lot of effort goes into them. And if you ever have the opportunity to bring 2 organizations together, if you have it, it's an amazing experience. But people ask me, was it hard? Of course it was hard. And what was the biggest challenge? And honestly, one of the biggest challenges was, what do we call this company when you bring together 2 organizations? And it might surprise you, but we actually turned that over to the employees of the new organization, and we had a contest. So there were some pretty poor names that came forward. Some mashups, you know, Potagrium. We said, no, that won't work. Someone said, well, we're all about innovation in agriculture. But that led to aggravation, so that wasn't going to work. But it ended up that Nutrien, quite lovely in a way, came forward from 2 employees, and they came up with the same suggestion, and one was from each respective legacy organization, and that's how we came up with our name of Nutrien. And you've already heard a little bit about who we are and what we do, and the first thing we did as a company in January when we came together was, after we sorted out what we'd be called, we focused on our purpose as a company. Early days, we thought that's one of the most important things we can and should be doing. And even broader than the SDGs, I think companies need to fundamentally go through that exercise to figure out, you know, what is our role in society today as business. And for Nutrien, our purpose is to grow our world from the ground up. And as we shape our sustainability strategy as this newly formed company, that purpose really drives our approach. So when we look at our sustainability strategy, it's much more than the principles we sign on to and much more than the material topics that we work so hard at in our day-to-day business. But we actually, with our senior leadership, answered the following question: what are the biggest challenges in the world that we can and should address based on what we do as a company, what we do as a business, and looking for the intersection of those 2. And I want to weave a few threads from yesterday, because Heather talked about in the panel, you know, the SDG framework resonates with business. And I agree it does. And if you're that company that's looking for what is the challenge or what are the challenges globally we should be addressing as a company based on what we do, what better framework is there to plug into to answer that question? It makes so much sense. So for us at Nutrien, We're still working through the details of defining that sustainability strategy and hope to come out with that externally in a few months. But we will be looking at sustainable agriculture, and as the world's leading provider of crop inputs and services, that makes a lot of sense for us. But in addition to Heather's point about the SDGs being a relevant framework, Mel Wilson said on the panel yesterday too, it's really important with the SDGs how we see them. And we need to see them as for developed countries as much as we see them for less developed countries. And of course, we need to see them be relevant for business in addition to that. And Linda challenged us early in the morning with, well, what does that mean for the role of government then if we are asking others to engage? John Beale on the panel from SDSN said, we want to find those billionaire individuals even to contribute to the SDGs. And I think it's the most important thing to take away from that is that there will be an investment gap in the achievement of the SDGs if we don't have all parties, if we're not working together, if we're not convening and collaborating on this. If we leave anybody out, that investment gap will hold back our success. But in addition to the investment that the private sector can bring, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about today, and it's in the spirit of the theme of SDG number 5 that has been a focus in yesterday and today. And that's where the private sector, it might surprise you, is also really keen on collaboration and working together. So you think private sector, we're pretty competitive, but I just wanted to share one example currently that relates to gender equality, where you really see private sector companies coming together, trying to solve these wicked challenges together on the gender equality front. So in Canada right now, through Global Compact Network Canada, and under Hella Bank Jorgensen's leadership, we have 10 companies in Canada that have come together. Soon that will be more. And we're taking a deep dive into the challenges around gender equality in Canada and businesses. And hopefully, because Shiza said yesterday, it's a 217-year journey to gender equality. We're hoping with our efforts and our deep dive that we can accelerate that progress and have more female leaders in our Fortune 500 companies. And I took a quote from yesterday that I thought just resonated with me with respect to female entrepreneurs, and I'll extend that to female CEOs. It's hard to be it if we don't see it. And so we really hope as a result of this project, the Gender Equality Leadership Project, that we can come out with a blueprint that serves as a guide for all companies on that roadmap to full inclusion. And I talked a bit about, before this, the investment gap, and I want to come back now. It's not just the investment gap that's an issue, it's the opportunity that we leave on the table if we don't pursue the SDGs. So specifically with the gender equality gap in Canada, if we can close it, that will add $150 billion to our GDP in Canada by 2026. And that's a compelling narrative. And that's a compelling reason for all of us, let alone business, to engage. There is a return on investment here. And those that see sustainability as a burden will fail to realize that opportunity. So thank you very much and enjoy the day.
All right, thanks very much, Candace. Things that they're up to? Any questions, just in case? All right. Well, we're a few moments early to connect with Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, and he's somewhere in the UK. We believe it might be London. Do you have any type of connection with them now at Unilever? No. Not yet. They're supposed to pipe in at 9?
That's right.
Okay. I've got a question for you. From what you heard yesterday, and we don't have mics yet, but from what you heard yesterday, Candace talked about the gender equality proposition and potential that was raised yesterday. How did that connect with you in the room? What are the types of things that really struck you in that conversation? Just to build on that, because if you're talking about that type of potential, we're talking about something serious here that we've got to actually harness that potential to get it going somewhere. Any reactions to that, folks, based on what we heard from Candace a few moments ago, of that potential for gender equality and what it might do? Any views? Yep, we'll take a mic to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm Diva Marie Beck with the Nightingale Initiative for Global Health. I'm not sure that it was mentioned how important women are for their communities in terms of health, education, everything that the community needs. If a woman has education, she makes other choices with regard to her reproductive health. She teaches her boys and girls. The community benefits from strengthening women. So I thought maybe that's a point to be discussing.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm told that Unilever is ready for us, and Paul Polman is ready to go. Paul, can you hear me? Paul Polman, are you there, and can you hear me? Good morning. Afternoon.
Hello, sorry. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Not a problem.
We'll be right with you.
Thank you. Where are you speaking from?
London?
All right. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, be right with you.
Thank you. So much for formality, right? All right, until Paul joins us, if you haven't had the opportunity of connecting with your colleagues and introducing yourselves, please do so.
Hi, this is IT in London. I'm just checking to make sure if you can hear us okay.
Sounds good. We're glad to hear
Fantastic. Paul will be in shortly.
Sounds good. How shortly? 1, 2, 3 minutes?
Pardon?
1, 2, 3 minutes?
Hopefully so, yes.
Thank you.
Just, I'll check with his PAs for you.
Thank you.
No worries.
You know, it's, those things happen. But people can connect at their tables, and you have a nice room today. And they might even nice natural light. It's good.
me in London. I was just stating, it says that video sharing is disabled by the administrator of the call. Is that something we could potentially do? States that. They could hear me, aren't they? I've just unmuted. Sorry. Can you confirm you can still hear us okay in 100 VE, please? Okay. We're also getting a little bit of feedback as well from your microphone. Maybe lower the sensitivity of the microphone at all. It's picking up quite a bit of frequency noise.
So they'll be able to.
Are you happy to use Skype? We do use Skype over here in Unilever. Would that be okay? Skype for business? Okay. I'll quickly create a link and then we'll send it across.
Oh.
Would it be Laveza that I send the link to? All five people? We've got Rianne and Laveza. Would there be anyone else?
Me.
Oh, sorry.
All right, we're getting there.
Laveza is the only contact we actually have in the emails at the moment. Sure thing, yes. You're cutting out quite a bit there. I didn't.
Hi, can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us?
Fantastic. There we go. Yes, we can hear you fine as well. That's fantastic.
All right. That's his table?
Yes.
Just turn up a little bit now, because if they're speaking.
Ready? It works.
The best quality, but it sounds like they can hear you okay. It's a little bit.
Can you hear us?
We can.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to all of you. I hope the technology doesn't disappoint us.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, we're really so honored to have you, Paul. And you're speaking to a room full of very dedicated folks who've been brought together by the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation in what's called Together 2018. These are folks who are interested to be here because the Sustainable Development Goals are really connecting with them as an opportunity to take an integrated approach to making a difference in a number of areas that really need to be worked on, not only in Canada but around the world. So Paul, you're speaking to a room full of people from Edmonton, Alberta. We're also live streaming with a number of cities across Canada and as far north as Whitehorse. So you have a very varied audience. The format we thought we would take is that I'm going to be introducing you formally in a few moments, but it'll be your speaking session will take the time that you want to give it, and it'll be followed by a question and answer period. And of course, we're going to be concluding at 10 o'clock Edmonton time. So Paul, you've been the CEO of Unilever since January of 2009. And under your leadership, we understand that Unilever has had a very ambitious vision to fully decouple its growth from overall environmental footprint, and of course to increase its positive social impact through the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and we're looking forward to hearing that. We also understand that you've sought cooperation with other companies to implement sustainable long-term business strategies versus the short-term, of course, and drive systemic change. You're a very busy person, we're told, and you're the chair of the International Chamber of Commerce. You're a member of the International Business Council of World Economic Forum, and you're also the chair of the B team, and you'll have to tell us about the B team. But you're also the vice chair of the UN Global Compact and a board member of the Consumer Goods Forum. And of course, until recently, you were the chair of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Ladies and gentlemen, from Edmonton and across the country, please welcome Paul Polman. Paul, the floor, the table, the tea is yours.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. And let me first compliment you on the initiative by the Alberta Council and University of Calgary. I also very pleasantly want to congratulate you on your Together 2018. I saw the Together 2017, which is goal number 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals, that is partnership. We're at such a state right now in the development of the planet and our human beings that the goal number 17 of partnership is more important than ever. Let me just take it back a few minutes. What I decided to do, if that is okay with you, till my time, 5 o'clock, but what we can do is I can just talk for about 15 minutes. That's why I put my phone down, my watch down. I talked for about 15, 20 minutes and then open it up for questions. Would that be okay with you, Dan?
That would be awesome. Thank you.
So let me then start with Charles Dickens, with his book, The Tale of Two Cities. He was talking about Paris and London at that time, and he was talking about the spring of hope and the winter of despair. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times, and I think that is where we find ourselves right now in our current development here, where for some reasons, I'll explain in a minute, many forces are coming together and we're clearly struggling on how to deal with this. It's the best of time is absolutely true. For despite some of the negativism or pessimism you hear around you or skepticism, it's actually the best time to be born. People live longer, more people have access to healthcare, Believe it or not, more women have more rights than ever in the history of mankind. Still not enough. Maternal health is down. More people have access to water. Every day, 240,000 people are getting lifted out of poverty. About the same number of people are getting access to hygiene or safe drinking water. It absolutely is a good time to be born. However, despite that, it's also the worst of times, and we're actually at risk of pulling things back again into the wrong direction. And there are a few challenges. The first one that you're well familiar with is the enormous challenge of climate change. It's probably one of the biggest challenges. Climate change, we are well off our track, 1.5 degrees. Some of you might have seen the recent IPCC report that came out a few weeks ago. And increasingly people understand that even between 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees, there's an enormous difference. And yet we are on a trajectory that is still more like 3.5 degrees if we don't bend the curve. Paris obviously did some of that. Since then, I think a lot of people, a lot of countries have forgotten again Paris, and we moved on to the next thing in our short-term myopic focus that we run the world with these days. So climate change, according to the World Bank, is putting about another 100 million people back into poverty. What we need is really max peaking by 2020 and be net zero on carbon emissions by 2050. And that's really what we should keep in mind and fight for. The second challenge we have is a challenge of the way we consume. It is very clear that our linear consumption model is basically coming to an end. We cannot continue to dig in the earth, produce something out of that into factories, and then ditching it on landfills or oceans. Oceans, especially, which in Canada, where you have the 3 oceans encircling you, and Catherine, the environmental minister, had put that very high on the agenda with the G7 in Halifax, and one of the outcomes there was a Global Plastic Charter. The US did not sign it, not surprisingly, but we got all the other countries to agree on that. We are on a trajectory right now of more plastic in the oceans than fish by the year 2050. 8 million tons of plastic get thrown in the ocean every year. And every coastline, and you have quite a lot of coastline in Canada, take 1 foot of coastline, we now have 5 plastic bags in the ocean for every foot of coastline. It's just totally ridiculous. So we need to move, as we need to decarbonize our global economy, we also need to move from a linear consumption pattern to what we would call a circular consumption pattern. And soon I would go even further, that we need to move to a regenerative consumption pattern. The third thing that we need to do, which is not surprisingly either, is that we need to move the financial markets to the longer term. If we want to attack the issues that are well laid down in the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the issues of poverty alleviation, of food security, of hunger, of protecting our planet's scarce resources, and all the other things that come with it, we need to provide more space for companies to deliver. The reality is that we've put so much money in the global economy, especially after quantitative easing again, that we have too much money chasing short-term returns, and many companies would argue that the pressure on them to do the right long-term things is more difficult now than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And then the fourth and final challenge that we need to deal with is we need to create an economic system where more people benefit. We now have last year's wealth creation, 82% of that wealth creation went to the top 1% of the world population. We need 8 people in the world that have the same wealth as the bottom 3.5 billion people. If you're well off, like many of us are, and you are in the financial market, you're doing pretty well. But that's not the case for most other citizens in this world. So we go back to the crisis of, sorry, if I may say, decarbonizing our global economy, we've never done that. Moving to a circular economy, we've never done that. Making the financial markets longer term, we frankly don't know how to do that. Money rules in this world in a way that is becoming dysfunctional. And creating a more equitable growth where wealth is spread better, we have not been able to achieve that. In every country in the world, bar one, the Gini coefficient is going up. And all of these challenges need to be addressed. time that I hope you would agree, global governance is failing us. Our global governance system was designed at the time of Bretton Woods, which is 1944, when actually, as a coincidence, 44 countries went together. You got the forerunners of the World Trade Organization, the OECD, the Security Council, and all the other ones. But it hasn't been adjusted. Anybody who runs a company has probably had 10, 15 restructuring plans or different strategies over that period of time, if not more. Now we are dealing with more global issues like climate change, cybersecurity, financial markets, and many other things, and yet increasingly discovered that we don't have a mechanism to deal with that. So a vacuum in global governance at the most crucial time in the history of mankind. Of 2007, 2008, many people called that a financial crisis or an economic crisis or a political crisis. In the end, whatever you want to call it, I've always called that a crisis of morality. I think it made us all realize, at least some of us realize, our economic system of overconsumption, high levels of private and public debt, and frankly, leaving too many people behind is simply not sustainable. Any system where too many people are left behind or feel that they're not fully participating will ultimately rebel against itself. And I think that is what you're seeing. See what happens today in the polls in the US, a very important day, but be it Italy, be it Hungary, be it Poland, be it the US, be it Brazil now, you know, this authoritarianism, if you want to, or it's on the rise, and democracy is actually on the decline. Basic human values are being challenged. And we need to be very cognizant of that, because if these basic values are challenged, the future of humanity is undermined. And a very crucial time in the history of mankind, in my opinion. So the good thing is that in 2015, as you well know, 193 countries came together in the UN, signed the Sustainable Development Goals, a very simple objective: leave nobody behind, to irreversibly eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. And that covers people, planet, prosperity, peace, and above all, partnership, as I mentioned before. And then in December of that same year, lo and behold, we go to goal number 13, which is climate action, and we sign the Paris Agreement. Lots of celebrations, because at that time we bent a 4.5-degree curve to about a 3.5-degree curve. But a clear commitment to do something about it, and above all, people discovering that climate change and human development are actually two sides of the same coin. Now, 17 goals are fairly difficult for business to understand. My premise is that business obviously needs to step up. Business needs to move from, at best, CSR, which is already still an exception, to what I call RSC, just turn them around, from social responsibility to responsible social corporations. And that's quite a different thing. In order to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, you need about $3 to $5 trillion a year to do that. Overseas development aid of all the governments, at a time actually that they are shrinking back to their own territories, is only about $160 billion. So 160 billion, 3 to 5 trillion. You know, Houston, we have a problem. So we need to get the private sector involved to unlock the finances, make the billions, unlock the trillions. In most countries in the world, if you look at it on average, the private sector is about 60% of the GDP, 80% of the financial flow, and now about 90% of the job creation. So we said, how can we get the private sector more involved faster into this sustainable development agenda? That's exactly the reason, as you said then, why I took the chairmanship of the International Chambers of Commerce. That's 45 million companies. The chairmanship of the Global Compact, that's 12,000 companies. The World Economic Forum and other bodies. I think you have a real opportunity, if we all focus on the same agenda, to create a flywheel: human development, SDGs, climate mitigation, what I would call a new social contract with society. That is really where I've spent a lot of my energy, next to running part-time a great company called Unilever. So what we now need to do is to be sure that the private sector understands the enormous potential that is locked up in these sustainable development goals, what I would call the only moral framework that we now have in this world. But 17 goals, 169 targets is a little bit confusing. Created a commission for business and sustainable development, appointed 20 commissioners, people like Jack Ma or myself and many others that were heavily into this agenda globally. And we said, how can we simplify this for business? And what we found was just looking at 4 areas. We looked at food and land use. We looked at mobility. We looked at energy transition. And we looked at health and well-being. And we found an opportunity of about $12 trillion. More importantly, also 380 million new jobs could be created. The sustainable agenda that we have is probably the best business agenda that is available. And the returns are enormous. There are not many businesses that have a return where the costs are 3 to 5 billion. And here, just looking at 4 areas alone, you have a minimum cost of 12 trillion, a minimum return of 12 trillion. I would argue in every of these 17 sustainable development goals, because we have waited so long to do something about it, the cost of not acting is becoming higher than the cost of acting. I can take any goal to challenge you on that. On climate change alone, the cost that the world incurs right now, floods and droughts and supply chain disruptions, people's lives lost, etc. IMF estimates that to be $5.3 trillion. That's more than the implementation of all the goals together. You look at goal number 16, which is peace and justice, which deals with corruption, conflict prevention, wars, etc. And the other side of it, obviously. We spend in this world right now on conflict prevention and wars 12 to 14% of the global GDP. That's nearly 3 times more, once more, than implementing all the goals. You take goal number 5 of gender equality. McKinsey has calculated that in every country in the world, we would give women the same access to education, financing, or land rights and all these things, lock the global economy once more by well over $20 trillion. We are at the point where the cost of not acting is higher than the cost of acting. That's why we would be well advised to do something about it. The major challenge, obviously, is that we play via climate change with our planetary boundaries. Species are disappearing right now at the rate of 1,000 to 10,000 times more than the normal levels we've seen in the history of mankind. This is not a battle between man and nature, because nature will be fine when we are all gone. This is a battle ourselves for survival, a battle to give the next generation and the generation after that an opportunity to make use of this wonderful planet as well. With its 5 billion years of existence of this planet, my simple question is always, what gives us the right, this generation, basically in the last 30, 40 years, to do more damage to this planet than we've done in the previous 5 billion years? What gives us the right to deprive our future generations from the same rights to this planet that we have? A Canadian philosopher is Hubert Reeves. Many of you have heard of him. I think Hubert Reeves said it very well in one of his books, when he said, man is the most insane species. He worships an invisible God and destroys a visible nature, not realizing that the visible nature he destroys is the invisible God he worships in the first place. And that is exactly what we are doing. So we need to snap out of this. We need to get the private sector behind that, and we need to create scale and impact to drive this transformative change. It's as simple as that. Companies that do this will have a bright future. Companies that don't will be dinosaurs. In the US 30 years ago, 4,600 public companies. Now there are less than half that number, because they've been run for the shareholder mynoptically. They've been run for their own interest of some people. If you run your companies for the interest of the common good, if you run your companies by making a positive contribution to society, negative or less negative, which is where CSR falls in, but a positive contribution for society, you have a long and bright future. In Unilever, we implemented the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan 8 years ago, and in my 10-year tenure as CEO of this company, have had a 300% shareholder return. We've consistently grown above the market, and our return on invested capital is 19%. And all that is done with the development agenda. The first thing we said was we put 3 overarching goals out there. Decoupling our growth from environmental impact, increasing our overall social impact, in case that would mean reaching 1 billion people more to improve their health and well-being. A company that reaches 2.5 billion people a day, we can set a target that is bigger than any government. And then last but not least, drive transformative change in the industry. What is unique about our model is that we take responsibility of our total value chain. Too many companies still think that you can outsource your value chain and also outsource your responsibility. That doesn't work. We look at our total value chain and we put 50 targets out there. 50 targets that we report on an annual basis. The reason we did 50 targets is because we are living at a time that trust is about as low as it has ever been. Trust in governments, trust in NGOs, trust in business. Trust can only be addressed by transparency as a basis. Transparency drives trust, and trust will be that basis of prosperity longer term. For Unilever, obviously, it meant first getting your own house in order. We've moved rapidly to green energy. In Canada, for example, we work with a company called Bullfrog from one of my previous visits. I'm the first one that just signed in Russia 84,000 megatons green contract on windmills at a price that is the same as fossil fuel. You can now get green energy into your value chain and you basically don't have to pay more. We move our factories to zero waste. We ensure that all of our sourcing is sustainable. In Canada, where we use canola for our Hellmann's brands, we work with the smallholder farmers, local sourcing, and get sustainable, and we do that all over the world. So we get our own house in order. Then we work obviously with our suppliers in the value chain who benefit from that, very motivating. But the bigger impact that we can have is through our brands. All of our brands need to have a purpose. If I ask many of the CEOs, what's the purpose of your company? What's the purpose of the business you're in? You see them stuttering. Very few are able to verbalize this properly. All of our brands, you take Dove in Canada, that stands for Women's Self-Esteem. Our Domestos toilet bowl cleaners is attacking the issues of open defecation. Our bar soaps are helping simply a child reach the age of 5 by cutting down on infectious diseases like pneumonia, diarrhea. Then once you have used your brands to leverage that size and scale and create these movements, we then obviously try to work on more transformative things. How do we move the whole world out of deforestation? Get below 1.5 degrees? How do we change the face of advertising to unstereotype advertising and portray a better, a fairer, a more just image of women, for example? These are all transformative changes that we work on. And then last but not least, we have to work with governments in advocacy, in partnership to de-risk that political process. The only reason that Paris got a fairly decent agreement at that time was because business was behind that, civil society was behind that. It gave governments a lot of confidence. For the interest of time, I'll just summarize and open it up for questions. I could talk a lot more about many of these things. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we have everything to solve the issues we are faced with. To feed the 840 million people that go to bed hungry, we have the audacity to waste 30 to 40% of the food that we produce. It's easy to solve. We don't need more PhDs or sending people to Mars to find the answer. We could deforestation tomorrow. Most of our land is degraded. We could restore it and move to sustainable farming. Our cities, the 8 million people that die prematurely of air pollution, we know how to deal with air pollution, especially in our cities. Some cities are making progress, others like Delhi, you've undoubtedly read about that, are falling off the cliff. On any of these areas, we know what to do. We have invented the toilet. Certainly have enough money to build them, to give people at least a minimum decency. But for some reason, we don't do it. The reason we don't do it is it depends on all of us. The thing that is missing is human willpower. As I often say, we need more trees, we also need more leaders. Leaders that are more purpose-driven. Leaders that think longer term. Leaders that can work in partnership. Leaders with a high level of awareness of what is going on in the world and a drive and engagement to do something about it. Leaders that operate with a certain sense of humanity and humility. And we're just darn short of these leaders. If the average tenure now of a CEO is less than 4.5 years of a publicly traded company like mine, it shows you that they're clearly not equipped to deal with these challenges that I laid out to you. So we need to invest in leaders. We need to invest in leaders that are first and foremost human beings, that understand that greed might be good for some, but generosity is better. Leaders that unselfishly invest in others, knowing that by doing so, they'll be better off themselves as well. So that's probably the biggest thing you can do next to implementing this sustainability agenda to your own organizations and your value chains. I think we're blessed with many of these leaders, but right now the world is in a situation where we know what we need to do. We know the direction we need to go. In some of these areas we're moving way too slow and not at the scale that we need. So all of our energy and your energy, if you have 150 people in this room, you need to make 1 and 1 11, to think about what you can do together at a bigger scale than each of you can do individually, to move the sustainable development agenda with scale and speed that it requires. I'll just end by reminding us of one thing. You are lucky. You are very lucky. Lucky that most of you probably went to university, that you didn't have to worry about food in Canada, that you made it past the age of 5, that you didn't have to defecate. You're lucky that you're sitting there because you have a certain level of financial independence. You can decide where you work. Slavery is a strange concept to most of you, or child labor you've never been exposed to. Well, the reality is that if you belong to this lucky 2%, if you have won the life lottery ticket, as I call it, then it is our duty to put ourselves to the service of the other 98%. And that is living a life with purpose. You do that, when your companies do that, you will attract the right people, you will have higher engagement, your cost will go down, your reputation will go up, your innovation programs will be stronger because they're more meaningful. And you have a long and bright future as a company, but also as a life. When it's time to move somewhere else, you can simply say we did make a difference. We found this world in a shape that was not as good as what it should have been, but we're handing it over to the next generation in a better shape. We are the only generation that has a chance to irreversibly eradicate poverty and ensure that the next generations never have to deal anymore with the devastating effects of climate change. So I welcome you on this journey. I wish you a lot of luck, and I'll certainly feel, if you're happy with that, then we can open it up for Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much, Paul Polman. I will also invite people who are in the room in Edmonton, if there are any questions you want to direct to Paul, if you can come up to the front of the room. And that would be a good thing to do, and we'll have a microphone here available to you. In the meantime, Paul, we have a number of questions on Slido that folks in remote locations as well as Edmonton were able to put together, and one of the more popular ones is around the notion of a single corporation having so many positive and negative impacts on the SDGs. How do you recommend corporations report and communicate on SDG progress? Now, I'm leveraging on this question because you at Unilever have developed a sustainable living plan, and you've so ably described what that means in terms of your products and the difference it's making in society. But as you have worked over time in the global groups that you have been part of and the leadership that you've displayed, how do you feel corporations could play a role in tracking, first of all, in increased awareness of the SDGs and what they can do about it, but how they can actually report and communicate on SDGs in your view? And essentially, the underlying question is, what role and responsibility could the private sector play to really advance this in light of what you have experienced as a corporation? Paul, over to you.
So there are two questions in that, but let me start with the last one. I think the first question that you started with then was more of how do you deal with these trade-offs that we all have in life, which are sometimes tough. And then the second thing is, how do you measure progress and explain that and build transparency and trust around the implementation of the SDGs. First of all, I'd like to start with the end in terms of the issues that we now face can be better solved with these partnerships and forging these partnerships than going alone. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go better. So there's a lot to do, I think, with a group like this, go far, and you certainly want to set the example in Canada. Canada, by the way, which is behind its trajectory on climate change in Paris, may I point out, without insulting anybody in the audience. So the first thing you have to do if you embark on this journey is to really be sure that the CEO of this company is fully behind this. The fish starts rotting at the head. So when I was chairing the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, we took 200, we have 200 of the most forward-thinking or progressive companies. We rotated half of the companies out because the CEOs were not committed to this aggressive agenda, important agenda that we have for humanity. So we rejuvenated that. And my only criteria for letting these companies in, as chairman at that time, was having a discussion with the CEOs. Can they talk without a piece of paper or without the public relations department sitting next to them? We really understand what is happening in this world. Just like you do recruiting, you can see if someone is the real deal or not. So the first thing is get your CEO to believe in this. And if he doesn't, and you believe in it strongly, work for another company. It's part of this process, I think, to go to the highest common denominator. Then the second thing is you have to get your boards behind it. Certainly if you are a publicly traded company, a little bit easier if you're a privately or controlled company, but get your boards behind it. Because what we are talking about here is as a multi-stakeholder business model. You have to, in order to manage these trade-offs, which might happen over time, you have to be sure that over a 5 or 10 year period, satisfy all the stakeholders that you have, including the shareholders. Now, in Europe, which is an economy that's not doing well, sometimes you have to close a factory. And then people say, well, you're a hypocrite because you say you have a strong social model, but meanwhile, you lay off the employees there. You need to do that to keep your business obviously healthy. You understand that. But at the same time, we're trying to create more jobs, either directly or in our value chain, over a period of time. That's one of the reasons we made a commitment to create jobs for 5 million smallholder farmers, for example. So the trade-offs you are better able to manage over a longer period of time. And in fact, we've always done that as businesses. We have to make decisions. Do we invest in people training and development, which could have a 25-year payout? Do we need to invest in IT systems, which might have a 10-year payout? Do we need to invest in a factory, which might have a 5-year payout? We make these decisions all the time and are able to deal with these dichotomies that come with it. But when it comes to investing in the future of humanity, we somehow fall off our chairs and don't know how to deal with it. So then once you have your board on board and your CEO on board, together co-create what some quicker wins are to build momentum. We looked at our whole value chain, which was a decision we made. We said for each of our brands, we looked at the biggest impact: water footprint, carbon footprint, waste. And we made about 30 variables around each of these brands so that the R&D people, the product development people, our brand people could see where they needed to make these bigger improvements to achieve these overall goals of water neutrality or climate neutrality and all the other things. So measurements do help. And I would argue, you get what you measure is a very valid statement. And I would argue also don't be afraid to publish that. We are big pushers of the Ruggie framework for human rights. This is the 70th anniversary of human rights, and as humans, we should be terribly disappointed in how far we have come in that respect. So we try to implement that in our value chain. And I asked Oxfam to audit that. Audit report had a lot of issues, not as much perhaps as other companies, but we have 80,000 suppliers, many subcontractors. They discovered issues, and we deliberately asked them to do it in Vietnam, which is not an easy country. But I said, you publish that report and make it public. A lot of people were worried. The papers are going to kill you. People go after you. Not at all. Not at all. The reaction was the opposite. If companies like Unilever have to deal with these challenges, can you think of how much these other companies have to deal with it? And we found people want to be part of those solutions. It builds trust. That transparency builds trust that is absolutely needed to get to these partnerships. So not being afraid to put these targets out there and these ambitions is a very important part of this as a commitment you make towards society. So then here are some of the steps, without repeating them, of how we handle these trade-offs and some of the processes that we go through to put the Sustainable Development Goals in place in companies. But it can only work if you all truly believe in a multi-stakeholder long-term business model. That's why I like the B corporations, the benefit corporations. There are 2,600 of them now. They're also in Canada. Unilever has actually bought 6 of them in the last 2 years alone. These benefit corporations have that written in their fiduciary duties, in their charter, and they are a mix, if you want to, between a social model and a pure economic model. Brands like Ben & Jerry's or Shea Moisture or Seventh Generation are wonderful B Corp brands for us that, not surprisingly, are growing 15 to 20% because the world is waiting for them.
All right, thank you very much, Paul. We have a question from Edmonton, and the person's going to the microphone.
Hi, thank you. Julie Savard-Shaw from Women Deliver Mobilization Canada. So thank you for your remarks. They were really motivating and inspirational. You mentioned 2 things that stood out to me. One was the McKinsey report about women's inclusion in the economy, as well as investing in leaders, which I also think is really important, investing in women leaders specifically. So what are you doing at Unilever and your businesses in the Unilever family, and what would you recommend the private sector do to achieve and advance SDG 5?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce, for the question, and that's obviously an absolutely crucial question. In any of the goals that you look at, the groups of people that are more disadvantaged under any of these goals are women and girls. There is no exception. And yet the highest pay is investing in women and girls. So what we do at Unilever is a few things. The first thing is get our own house in order. Over the last 10 years, we've moved to more or less gender parity. We are 48% in management in our company. Obviously, equal pay. In fact, in the UK, we just had to publish it, and we had a 104 index, women getting paid more than men. We have, my board is 40% women. The external board is gender balanced, 50% women, 50% men. So internally, we have all the policies that you can think of, maternity policies, paternity policies. We wouldn't call it the plans for gender diversity and focus on women. All of our plans we call actually gender balance. We achieved the 48% in the company with significantly more women in the head office environment because we deal with sales forces or manufacturing or places like India and Saudi where the numbers don't add up yet. So in many other places we're well above it. Now what Unilever has done to go well beyond this is obviously internally we still have to fight sometimes the unconscious biasness. People say things or where we have sexual harassment cases or inappropriate comments. So that happens at a very low scale, but we have to deal with it. So unconscious biasness will continue to be our biggest challenge. But the programs are in place for anything. In fact, we're one of the few companies in the world that pays for gender sex change operations. That's how strongly we feel about dignity and respect for everybody, which is basically the value we're talking about. And then we go into the whole value chain. We made a commitment to create livelihoods for 5 million women again in the value chain. We have tea plantations, and Kericho in Kenya, 90,000 people live on these tea plantations. Tremendous issues of sexual harassment or depriving women of their rights. It's part of their overall culture. If a woman has been raped and they would go to the police most likely would rape them again because they've been raped anyway. So we could only change that in our tea plantations by having lots of social workers there. But the final breakthrough came when we put the same number of supervisors as women and men. So we look at our total value chain. We trained smallholder farmers. We want as many women to be trained than men. What we find, not differently, just like Mohammed Yunus, is that investment in women have a higher return actually than investments in men. Now, I want to end this very briefly by saying it's not only about women. It's about respect for everybody that drives me. I'm a big champion for LGBT. We are now in the process of hiring 8,000 people with disabilities. I deliberately say disabilities instead of disabilities because a lot of the people, like all of us, have different abilities. I run my own foundation with my wife for blind people in Africa, but there are 1.3 billion people with disabilities or disabilities in this world. That's 15% of the global population. I challenge all of you, including Unilever, in most countries, most companies, we have at best 1 or 2% of the people with disabilities on our payroll. So we've just made a commitment to hire 8,000 people in the next 3 years, which is not easy to do, but we'll go for it. And it all fits into leaving no one behind. It's probably the best thing to stop here, fully in line with the SDGs.
All right, thank you, Paul. Paul, we've got 2 quick questions, and I'll be looking for 2 relatively short answers as well.
Yeah.
How is Unilever shifting to an alternate consumption model with its products? You described some of your products earlier, and of course the difference that they've made, but how does this alternative consumption model work? Specifically with a few examples, if you could.
Well, the first thing that you can do on anything you look at, 30% is easily done. You can save 30% on your own energy. We can save 30% on energy with which we make our products. We can save 30% on water. We can save 30% on plastic if you decide to do so. But if you design it from the start, you can actually move very quickly to a circular economy. The factories we design are closed-loop water systems. In fact, with some of our products like Knorr, where we have dehydration, we give water back to the system. You design factories that the water that comes out is cleaner than the water that comes in. You design factories with 0 waste. So in any of our products now, we look at that in terms of a closed-loop system. Then in terms of using more stuff, which we frankly cannot afford, we have to design our products much more beyond just the physical product into a broader experience. For example, our bar soaps, normally to get disinfectancy, you need to wash 30 seconds your hands. Many of the emerging markets, you don't have 30 seconds. Certainly a kid doesn't have 30 seconds. You don't have water for 30 seconds. So we design our products with 10-second rinsing. And that with better cleaning, cleaning of your hands, only 10 seconds. We have fabric softeners that need to be rinsed 2 or 3 times. We invent fabric softeners that can be rinsed only once. So we look at our footprint and try to significantly reduce the consumption of materials, or to move to fully renewable materials, in which case it's fine. Music is a great example of that. We've moved from the big records to the CDs to Spotify, where if you have green energy to give you the music, it's unlimited without environmental impact. And that we need to think about more and more into our products and start to think in the next steps that we're busy with regenerative. If you buy our products, the would be better. That's really where we should be at.
Paul, thank you. And for our last question.
Paul, my name is Wayne Kynes. I'm with the Nightingale Initiative for Global Health. Your truths that you've shared with us are inspiring and informative and admirable. But the communications industry is the largest industry in the world. It does affect our lifestyle. So how are you collaborating with the communications industry which of course is being confronted as not telling the truth and is the focus of great controversy at this time. How will they work on your team?
So, Wayne, this is an absolutely important question. And so one of the things that we've started at Unilever, because we are one of the biggest advertisers, so by being one of the biggest advertisers, we also have some weight in moving things. And we have worked with the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples and all this, which are relatively young companies located in California. All of them are millionaires or billionaires. They don't yet have the corporate culture to fully understand. They like to sell you on the benefits of what they do, but not yet take the full responsibility of their impact. So we have put some guidelines out there on where we want to advertise, how they need to ensure that their sites don't have porn or don't have terrorism. They can be accountable for their delivery of their services. I think they're waking up now because of the election interference, because of the way that they are segmenting society by bombarding them with single messages and not giving us access anymore to broader news. So we in the advertising community put standards up there that are quite rigid, that require them to invest, and that hopefully make them take more responsibility for their products than just simply saying Facebook allows everybody to communicate. Sheryl Sandberg gets it to some extent. Mark Zuckerberg is starting to get it. But that is really one of the major efforts. The second thing we do in advertising itself, I basically alluded to that already, we have to change the advertising. We have to help people make positive habit changes. We have to advertise about purpose. We have to create movements to get to positive news. So that's why we started, for example, the Unstereotype movement, where we take stereotypes out of advertising, where we work with the agencies to just simply not allow it anymore. In every advertising you see all across the world, the woman stands in the kitchen and serves the coffee to the man who sits in the living room watching television. It just doesn't make sense. So how can we use this advertising to drive social change is now a big movement that we're in as well. The main thing that we are doing with these social networks, if you want to, or the new media as you call it, is to spend a lot of time with them. I was a week on the West Coast a few weeks ago, spend a lot of time with them to talk about really what responsible business models are. But I always point out to them, Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he said when they built the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast of the United States, they forgot to build the Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast of the United States. With liberty comes responsibility. All these companies have had enormous liberty to get our data, to move things across the world. If they now don't take responsibility on cybersecurity, on privacy, on election objectivity, on terrorism, whatever, then people are going to reject them. They also, by the way, have to take responsibility of paying tax. That seems to be a sport to be everywhere and not pay tax if you're in the digital world. That's totally unacceptable. No country can function with education, with infrastructure, with healthcare, with all the other things if we don't pay our fair share of tax. So that's all part of bringing to that young, relatively new industry a little bit broader social charter, or what I call this new social contract of what responsible businesses would look like. If and when they do this, I think they'll be rewarded and they can be around for a long time to come. If they don't catch up very fast, you'll see a lot more regulations coming in. You'll see a lot more bifurcation of technologies across companies, and they are putting their business models at danger. And that's true for the Amazons of this world as much as it is true for the Facebooks or any other one.
Paul, we want to thank you very much for a very, very inspiring talk. And the types of things that you're doing are really a true inspiration. But I'm going to leave you with one small request from Edmonton, Canada, and that is, you've underscored on a number of occasions the real importance of leadership. And we're going to ask you if, in the role that you play today and the roles that you accept in the future, if you can continue to invest your energy and your ethics in shaping the leaders of the future, from the tea plantations to the boardrooms, so that they can play the roles and really exert the type of responsibility that you're talking about to building a future for this world that's going to be much better for everybody else. But for the work that you're doing now, for the leadership that you're displaying, and for the enabling environment that you're creating not only within Unilever, but the influence that you have globally, we want to thank you and express a very warm Canadian appreciation. I'll ask the room to join me.
What you're doing, and have a successful rest of your conference.
Thank you very much,
Thanks for the
Paul.
opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is time to shift gears into our workshops. On the schedule, you've got access to the locations. Most of them are on this floor. Did you have an announcement to make before we let these good people?
Change in one of the rooms, or I mean 2 of the rooms. The Maple Leaf room, which originally had ethical data, the session on ethical data is going to be moved to the Evergreen room, which is downstairs and down the hallway on the left. So please head that way if you're going for ethical data, or follow Julie in the back. And it has been switched with influencing behavior change, which will be in here. So if you are attending that session, please stay in here. Otherwise, Aurora, Glacier, and Prairie are just outside this room, and Evergreen is downstairs and to your left. Thank you.
We'll see you at lunch at 11:30.
I said, I think she's mastered the art of sleeping with her eyes open.